Well, we have to go again back to the Old Testament. There's that train station with all the trains
That's
coming
right.
in. When you go back to Ezekiel chapter 38 in verse 2, it mentions Magog, which when you study the back history of Magog, that would be the area of modern-day Russia. It also mentions Meshech and Tubal, and then in verse 6, Gomer and Togarmah. Now, in the time of Asia Minor, the time of Paul and Peter and the others who evangelized what is modern-day Turkey, that is modern-day Turkey, which it's referring to. In verse 5, it says Persia, and until 1936, Persia was known by that name, but today it's Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. In fact, Iran still speaks the Persian language. It also mentions in verse 5 Ethiopia, which would include Ethiopia, Somalia, and Sudan, and Libya. And then when you slip over to Psalm 83, there in verse 6, it mentions the Ishmaelites, which would be Saudi Arabia today, and in verse 7, Tyre, which is modern-day Lebanon. And then Daniel chapter 11, you see, back to the Old Testament to get information. And this is that second seal. Remember the man on the red horse coming forth with war, a war that's going to take place in the first 3.5 years. And when you go over there to Daniel chapter 11, starting in verse 40, it mentions the king of the north and the king of the south. Early on in chapter 11, you determine that geographically the king of the north is Syria and the king of the south is going to be Egypt. Now remember Isaiah, and here we are in the Old Testament teaching Revelation. In Isaiah chapter 17, it says Damascus is going to be destroyed. That's talking about Syria, and they're the first ones to make a move. Today, they're within 2.5 miles of the Israeli border, and Bashar Assad, the president, said he wants to take over the Golan Heights. So that's going to be the coalition of nations that are going to be under the direction of Satan, actually, as he influences those leaders of those nations to form this coalition.